Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome to the Monday of Thanksgiving week. I'm joined by Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy. Admiral, a good Thanksgiving week to you. I would like for you to sort out for us the reports on the Russia-Ukraine-U.S. negotiations. I frankly have not been reading them all that closely because they say very contradictory things, and I don't know how to decode them. How do you read it?
Well, thanks for having me, and happy Thanksgiving week to you as well, Hugh. And look, you're right to be confused. I'm confused, and I sometimes think I know what I'm talking about. So here's what I would say. It started out with not an appropriate opening gambit, and I think that was largely a Russian piece. I mean, Putin denied it, but I think it was largely a Russian piece. And of course, that gets an overreaction going in the United States that was uncomfortable. But now that we're sitting down at the table led by Marco Rubio, and I can't emphasize enough, I think, how important that is, led by Marco Rubio, hopefully we'll begin to work through the unacceptable language and find the middle ground where there is concessions by both Russia and Ukraine, only one of which has really happened to date, and that's Ukraine. And then we can have a deal, a ceasefire that's meaningful and has a chance of surviving. And so Secretary Rubio is going to work through what I think are about three big issues that have to do with territorial integrity, post-ceasefire security guarantees, and Ukrainian access to an appropriate defense industrial base process.
Well, let me start with the first one. Senator Cotton was on earlier, and I reminded him I'm doing with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, a close read of The Gathering Storm. And Munich came down to Hitler's demand and Chamberlain and the French government's concession of the fortresses along the Czechoslovakian border. Once those were given away, the game was given away, and Hitler just followed the rest of Czechoslovakia when he wanted to. The Russians keep asking for things that the Ukrainians can't give. Am I right about that? Fortress-like defensible lines that they're just not going to surrender?
I think that's the right way to say it. Defensible lines that are properly prepared to delay and probably defeat Russian advances. And they're being asked to give those away. And then the land behind it, that Russia already occupies, to concede its sovereignty with U.S. recognition. That, I think those are just combined are two unacceptable conditions. But the most unacceptable is actually the one you identified, the first one. Because if you give those away, if you concede too much territory, you create a fairly open plain for Russian maneuver warfare, especially if you constrict the size of the future Ukrainian army, and you don't have coalition of the willing ground forces like French and British occupying the front line as basically a Berlin brigade. To draw Europe into any kind of guarantee Europe's participation in any future conflict.
So what is that geography that is so important, Admiral? Is it a mountain range? Is it a valley with a river at the bottom of it? What is it that we're talking about?
Some of them are riverbanks, you're right. Some of them are areas where you could properly dig in and create a defensive position with favorable terrain on the backside of it. For the defensive forces. It's not mountain ranges. That's not part of this. So it's mostly water and maneuverable ground space. Some places are more marshy and swampy and can't be maneuvered through rapidly. But it's that, and it's the defensive fortifications that have already been built by the Ukrainians to prevent Russian movement. And they have been highly successful. I mean, I grant that Russia has done small land gains over their offensive this summer, very small, but an incredible human sacrifice that I have to believe there is eventually an endpoint for this for Russia, that you can't lose 100,000 people dead a year, 300,000 people injured, seriously injured a year, or dead. And continue this kind of battle. There is a human limit to the Russian sacrifice as well.
Now, on the question about the occupying force, it's not NATO, but it's not nothing. Who are we talking about and what numbers as a tripwire?
Look, if this is my answer, not anybody in Europe's answer yet. I think they need 20,000 troops minimum, ground forces. I think the vast majority of that comes from two countries in large units, and that is the UK and France. After that, there's smaller unit numbers from willing countries like the Baltic states, Romania, Poland, some others, potentially Scandinavians and Dutch and Belgian. But those will be, by definition, smaller battalion and below units. And so you can't have too many of those. Those disaggregate rapidly in combat. Whereas, the two large units, the Brits and the French have to provide large units to which those other units are aligned so that you get the maximum firepower out of them. And look, part of it's about actually stopping conflict. And the other part is a deterrent one that says, if you cut through our people, we will be here in perpetuity to ensure you don't.
Have you seen any evidence on the part of, and I don't read the French press, I do read the British press. Have you seen any willingness on the part of the Starmer government to do that?
They've talked to it, and then you're right. I have not seen the detailed planning that would support that, but they have in the past talked to a willingness to commit to that. This is more like, every time there's a legitimate discussion of a ceasefire, the Brits and the French begin to discuss this. The problem here is this discussion right up front, this one was so dismissive of it, it hasn't encouraged the discussion of it to the degree you normally get. I do think both those countries would commit to this. I do think whether they would commit 5,000 to 7,000 troops each, that's really hard to sustain. At a 3-for-1 rotation, which is what you'd have to do, that would tie up a significant, an almost complete amount of their maneuver warfare.
Well, now, final question. The industrial base to support what Ukraine needs. Is that weaponry that we have that we sell to the Europeans that they give to the Ukrainians? ATACMS, tanks, anti-tank weaponry? What are we talking about?
And air defense systems. Exactly. It's PURL, the PURL initiative that President Trump has championed. It's the idea of Europe buys about $2 to $3 billion a month worth of gear from us, from our defense industrial base. Some of it's drawn down from our forces where it's available, which isn't much anymore. Most of it comes from head of the line at the kind of after the U.S. at the defense industrial base. And then that $2 to $3 billion a month is then transferred to Ukraine as it's produced, paid for by the Europeans, provided by the Americans, jobs for the United States, kind of a win for us. And Ukraine has the equipment. The problem is PURL has not taken off. It's more in the $1 billion a month right now. And then the U.S. has done something where they've held weapons and said, well, we have a stockpile issue. And, that puts the whole program at risk when you do that.
Admiral, in terms of our commitment to that, do we have the capacity to take care of ourselves, Taiwan, and the Ukrainians and everything they need?
Look, not in everything we need, but in the vast majority of things we need. So in the extended range attack munition, which I mentioned to you before, is a F-16 or MiG-29 launched long-range weapon. It's a beautiful weapon. I mean, the president should love this weapon. It's a low-cost missile built by the United States. It's unique. It shows our defense industrial base can be agile. Now, this was done by non-primes, but great weapon system. ATACMS, they're available now. Fire sale. The Army's shifting to a different weapon system. Some artillery. The place we're going to have a problem is Patriots, and to a lesser degree, the AMRAAM missile that goes on the NASAMS. These are both air defense weapons. Those are the problems where we have demand signal for ourselves, for our forward forces deployed. The Taiwanese are starting to have a demand signal for that. The Japanese have a demand signal. And now the United States has now Ukraine has a demand signal that we would service. But those are already being ordered. The president and President Zelensky made a big deal on this for up to 25 batteries of Patriot over the next 7 years.
Well, then, with that kind of a demand signal, don't they build I don't know who builds the Patriot, whether it's Raytheon or don't they build a second plant somewhere?
So that's exactly what's happening. Raytheon, the Army is starting to generate a requirement to go from 3,000 missiles or 4,000 missiles to 13,000 missiles of Patriot.
Whoa!
Now, I don't think they'll ever get to that because these are, 3 million, 4 million apiece. That's pretty expensive stuff. But surely that demand signal will drive Raytheon, who is, you were correct, they are the producer, to increase production capacity. In fairness to Raytheon, the United States demand signal is quite a sine wave on this over the last 20 years. It's very hard to make the investments necessary.
Well, Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you for the review of that. I'm sure we'll be talking about the same thing next week or the week thereafter because it's all blizzard and smoke right now, and I can't really tell what's going on, but I hope you've laid out good parameters. Thank you, Admiral. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are sponsored in part by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree.